back to Good Reads. I'm your host, Jim Hall. I think we've got a really fun episode for you today. We're going to meet with author and artist John K. Snyder. He's going to talk about a whole gamut of things. We had a chance to sit him down, and he talks a little bit about his graphic novel adaptation of 8 Million Ways to Die. He talks about his own creator-owned work, Fashion in Action, and he talks about the hundreds and hundreds of covers and comics that he's worked on over the years. First up, John talks about his graphic novel adaptation of the novel 8 Million Ways to Die. John talks about the challenges of adapting an already existing novel and putting it out for the fans who originally loved the novel, but also creating new fans for a new generation and a new medium.
The character here is Matthew Scudder, Detective Matthew Scudder. And he's he's been featured in a series of short stories, a number of novels, about 17, and a novella, I believe. And this book in particular is the fifth in the series, 8 Million Ways to Die. And the character actually ages in real time. So this book was published in, the original novel was published in 1982. And so for the adaptation, I kept that 1982 setting. And it was really an honor to have this opportunity to adapt this. This is a very famous novel. It's a landmark book in the mystery genre, and it's a terrific book that deals with a whole lot of different things. It deals with, the human condition. It's a thriller, it's a detective story, but it's a whole lot of different things, and I found it to be a really rewarding and challenging, in the best of possible ways, project. And I was really grateful to Lawrence and the guys at IDW for offering me the opportunity to be able to adapt this. I had a great editor, Tom Waltz, and all the whole thing in general was a pleasure to work on.
Now, really amazing because you keep the core, the novel intact, and you add some of your own life to it, specifically with the art and the vibrant New York City. You bring life to New York City, not only through his words, your words, and it's absolutely beautiful. Can you talk about this? Is a work of love that you've done. The artwork is amazing, the story is amazing. Scudder comes to life on the pages. Talk a little bit about the process of bringing him to life on the page.
Well, Lawrence in his writing, he's very descriptive in terms of the locales that Scudder and the characters travel through within New York City, and it's been said before in analysis of the book and in general, and Lawrence has even said himself that New York itself is a character of the story, in the story and in the Scudder series in general. And I've always had a love for New York myself, and this particular period, the late 70s, early 80s, is very near and dear to me personally, because growing up, I was living in the D.C. area, and I was always fascinated by New York during that period. My first time up in New York was actually the summer of 1981. And so I had a vivid memory. I have a vivid memory of this general period, as brief as it was, but I saw this as a great opportunity to kind of incorporate my love of the city, and also, frankly, when I was living growing up in the downtown DC area, and spent time around there, kind of integrating some of my thoughts of what it was like to be in the city, and put all that together in this book. I also, the movies from that period, like Mean Streets, Scorsese's Mean Streets, and Taxi Driver, and just a whole slew of other films. Again, that not so much the content as the look of the city, I try to incorporate, visually, in the adaptation.
Now, as the people at home see some of the images, could you talk about, I think a lot of people, the comic book stereotype is long gone. People know about graphic novels and how these are many adult-oriented things. But I think people are going to look at this and say, boy, this isn't your dad's comic book. This isn't our This is museum art quality inside
thank
here.
you.
And could you kind of talk about, as people are seeing some of the pages on screen, uh, tell me how long it takes to produce a page like this?
Well,
and some of the
it
processes
varies.
going
It
in.
varies, and the production stage in a project like this goes on different levels. The first being the actual literal adaptation of working with the original novel, the manuscript, and translating that and doing the layouts to fit within the allocated. We had about 130 pages or so for this book, for how to fit the novel and the whole process of adaptation, which is again, it's a challenge, but it's a great challenge, especially when you're working with this brilliantly written work with this fantastic dialogue. So a lot of ways in structuring the layout of the book, I want to present the characters in a way to kind of enhance the dialogue. So it's a matter of balancing, you know, a interaction between two characters, and how am I going to put them in the panel to get the most dramatic effect? What kind of emotional quality do they have on the? It's almost like you're acting.
Absolutely.
Through the artwork, because you want to pay attention to what the characters are saying. What are they doing in that scene? Now, since it's not live action and it's a still image, you want to be able to convey an emotional quality to it that you don't necessarily do in the facial expressions, because you have a limited amount of space to work with, and you can't have close-ups on every single panel because you have to show like location and such. So you want to get into arranging the characters in a scene where it also works into the characters. So you have them way in the background, some in the foreground, overhead shots, that sort of thing. So the whole thing is kind of a little bit of a balancing act. Also, with something like this, because it's a hardback, because it's a graphic novel, and it's something that is a lot more expensive than the old comics
Right,
were.
absolutely.
I try to, in this case, and in any case, when I work on a graphic novel, I try to make it worth the investment people put into buying it. And I like to give them something that will take some time to read, and that was my attitude with this book. So I kind of had a format where you would have the traditional panel to panel, real time, activity going on between the characters. But I would also do pages where it was almost a full page shot of a full figure, and inset panels of people talking, and then like lines of dialogue running concurrent to like the figure. And that was something that you would almost read like a semi-novel, like like an illustrated book. And that was kind of a way to break up, and to add like a time level to the progression of time in the story and such. So the general effect was to create a kind of a whole new kind of rhythm to the traditional comic book, pacing, where it's 20 pages and it's over. This, this is more like, if it takes you 1 or 2 days to read, that's great.
Next up, John talks about his creator-owned Fashion in Action, and it's one of my favorite works from John. It's absolutely an amazing piece. After you watch the show today, I hope you go on to Amazon and you track this graphic novel down, because it's really amazing. So let's continue with John as he talks about his work on Fashion in Action.
Okay, well, Fashion in Action is a series that I created back in the mid '80s, and it involved a celebrity protection agency in 2086 that was headed by the CEO Francis Knight, who is a world traveling entrepreneur that decided to start the world's most fabulous celebrity protection agency. And it's kind of a mix of a lot of different things that I love, like 60s spy-fi, I guess is one way to put it. And at that time, when I first developed the series, my love of the new music that was coming out during that period, from the early 80s on up. But it is basically, my adventure strip, that I wanted to do with, that has a lot of different world locations, a lot of locations around the world, that's kind of jet setting, and I really want to kind of work in that, even with the celebrity angle, that it actually ends up that they get involved in all these world-saving adventures. So these things start out small, and then you develop into these bigger and bigger adventures. But I actually had an undercurrent that I wanted to get into it too of individuality for the characters, and it's something that's very near and dear to me. So it was originally appeared as a backup series in Timothy Truman's Scout comic, and that was one concurrent story that was collected, and then I did a few specials afterwards. And like you had said, I had recently had the opportunity to restore the original colors and artwork, and using our technology today, was able to put together a really nice collection. So it's all out there, and it's great. It's currently available on Comixology, actually.
I'd like to talk about, we had some real interesting discussions as that process was going on about how you brighten up and rework art that might be 20 years old, 30 years old. Talk a little bit, I think it's a very interesting process and things that go on, because that's happening a lot now, that we're taking some old classics and brightening them up, fixing up a little bit. Talk about some of that process.
Well, it's funny because when I first worked on this series back in the mid '80s, this was for Eclipse Comics, and I was working with Cat Ironwood and Dean Mullaney, and they were very. This was a very big period of the beginning of independent comics. You had Dave Stevens with The Rocketeer. All kinds of great things were coming out of that period, and the point is that they were very serious about giving artists their rights, in terms of giving you control of your character, that you had the rights to the character. But in addition to that, they always made sure that you got your artwork returned, which had actually been an issue.
Sure.
Really, that was only resolved only recently at that point, with a lot of different companies. So I had all the artwork returned, and in addition, I did all the color work, and that was done on what they call gray lines at that time, which was you would get a film positive that was the size of the actual printed page of the artwork, and then you would have a gray line reproduction, and you would color on the gray line reproduction. Well, through the years, I had kept all these materials,
Okay.
and I actually always had made black and white copies of all the line art. So I had all these resources, and with today's technology, like I said, in Photoshop, I was able to scan all these different elements, and sometimes there would be some aging in some of the original art. Sometimes some of the colors had kind of faded a bit. So I was able to actually, piece together using all these different elements. And when I did Fashion in Action, I was using a lot of flat color. I was actually using cell paint, animation cell paint, to do some of the work on the gray lines. So I was working in a lot of flat tones, as opposed to there's a lot of modeling and shading that's done in computer coloring now. But I had more of a flat color look at that point. So it was actually very easy, well, not so much easy, but it was not as complex in terms of the shading and such, to restore the original kind of vibrancy, of the original color. So it gets to be a very meticulous process, but I enjoyed it. And I was really happy with the final result. And I think it came out I was very, very happy with how it came out. And I've had a lot of people tell me that the work still looks very contemporary, and that's really a nice thing to hear.
Next up, John talks about his work on the very famous comic book Grendel. For those of you in the know, you know that it was a very popular series that still runs to this day, but different artists and authors take over the character or create a new character in this Grendel mythos. And John talks about his work with the character.
Well, getting back to that period again, I was mentioning Dave Stevens' Rocketeer, another real vanguard of that early period of kind of this explosion of independent creator-owned comics was Matt Wagner's Grendel, which was a Comico at that time, and the initial run of Grendel featured a character, Hunter Rose, and then there was a character. Then he actually died at the end of Matt's initial run with that character, and then he introduced another Grendel, Christine Spar. And at the time, I had just wrapped up my work on Fashion in Action, and Diana Schutz, who was the editor on Grendel at the time, had asked me if I'd be interested in being involved in Grendel. And I thought, well, that must be because I'm doing fashion and action and Frances Knight, and this is a strong female character, and this Christine Spark, and it was beautifully done. The book was beautifully done. Again, had that kind of new music style by the Panda Brothers and Jay Geldof, and I just thought, oh, this is going to work. And I remember the first time I talked to Matt, I was talking about, so I guess I'll be continuing the adventures of Christine Spark, and he said, no, she gets killed off. And I was just shocked because I thought, well, this is I mean, what's going to happen, right? But at the same time, it really kind of endeared me to Matt right away because I was like, this guy takes chances, and this is great. I have no idea what we're going to do. So what I had learned is that Grendel is kind of almost like a spirit that goes from one character to the next. And actually, the run with Christine Spar was followed by a short run with a cartoonist, illustrator writer, Bernie Moreau, who's who's done brilliant
Absolutely.
work.
Yeah.
And then I believe Tim Sale might have done somebody else, another writer, done like one or two in between. And then our run was going to kick in, and that was the Epi Thatcher run, which was set way in the future in this completely dystopian universe. And that's where we introduced, the Epi Thatcher character. And that was a whole different world, that was completely worlds away rather, from, Christine Spar. So it was really an exciting and a real joy to work on.
As I mentioned in the open, John is a prolific artist and author, and I'm sure a lot of you already recognize his name. So I was so happy to be able to sit down with him. As the conversation continues, we talk more about his art, his writing, and so many of the companies he's worked for over the years.
Well, I always wanted to keep moving, and I always had an idea that I wanted to draw as many different characters as possible, and and I was, for me personally, I enjoyed doing things like single illustrations, like working on, like a gallery piece or a cover, or even when the trading card thing was popular, trading cards, and it was always I always had always got a big thrill out of doing these various characters that I either personally had known from the past. For instance, I did a Johnny Quest gallery piece for Kamiko back when they had the license, and Johnny Quest was a personal favorite from my childhood. So that was a joy. And then a few years later, Dark Horse was doing adaptation of the animated series that came out in the 90s, and I did a few covers for those. So that kind of thing was a lot of fun, and also to be involved in projects that were more current, like I did Alien trading card for and worked on Alien Project. Again, it was just a single illustration or one page in like a jam project with other artists and writers for Dark Horse as well. But I always liked that challenge of kind of hopping and getting into showing that I would do all these different. Was able to draw all these different type of characters, and it was always very interesting for me.
A lot of you at home are fans of the movie Suicide Squad, a very popular DC comic that was turned into a movie and then a second movie. Well, John did a lot of work for that comic book, a lot of artistic work, a lot of covers, and a lot of issues where he was the artist for Suicide Squad. So John talks about that history with the publishing company DC, and in particular with Suicide Squad.
That was really fun because my first job at DC Comics was on Suicide Squad, and I started first started coming out in 1989, and that was after I'd finished working on Grendel. John Ostrander, the writer, John Ostrander and Kim Yale, the writers of that time, had asked me if I'd be interested in working on Suicide Squad, which was a really fun offbeat comic. I was not really what you would call a traditional superhero artist at all, but John was not your traditional comic book superhero writer either, and so he brought this the whole concept of it, of these misfit villains that would get knocked off and you never knew what was going to happen from one issue to the next. It was great fun to work on, and it's really interesting because it was such a misfit group. and it was kind of a misfit comic, you know. And so it is just fascinating to me to see over the decades how now Suicide Squad is this world-known movie franchise, and that Peacemaker is now going to have his own series.
Right.
You know, this character that initially started, I believe he was created by Pat Boyette over at Charlton, and then the character was moved to DC, and then he first appeared in, I drew him when he first appeared in Suicide Squad, and now that to have that kind of be a thing, like, you know, the first appearance of Peacemaker in Suicide Squad, I had no idea that that would ever be something. But what was real neat was recently, when the movie was getting ready to come out, DC had a month of variant covers based on the way they look in the movie. So I revisited, you know, the squad for a double cover, and it was, here I am drawing Peacemaker again in 2021. It's a really exciting period to see, again, getting back to modern technology, that it's the ability to be able to, you know, to watch all these characters come to life. I mean, the Suicide Squad movie, the new one from James Gunn, was fantastic. I mean, it was a beautiful movie. It was, and Gunn's dedication to the spirit of John's writing was really evident in the movie. So the fact that he captured it, it was almost like, it really was a tremendous experience to sit in a theater and watch these things that we would draw, these crazy scripts that John would have, with literally the kitchen sink in it, and then you see this beautifully realized vision that Gunn had of mirroring, you know, that, but again, the scope is so far beyond anything you could have imagined, you know, from that period. So it's wonderful to see.
Well, that wraps up this unique edition of Good Reads. We really hope you enjoyed it. John wanted us to remind you that he is on Facebook, he is on Instagram, and John also has his own website, johnksnyder.com. We thank you for watching Good Reads, and we'll see you next time.